right, hello and welcome to another expert interview. My name is John Golden from SalesPOP Online Sales Magazine and Pipeliner CRM.
We have to move the other way. There you
go. And today I'm joined by the always interesting Andy Paul, author, blogger, speaker, podcaster, and so many other things.
General nice guy.
General nice guy. And today, Andy and I wanted to talk about how to cut through the noise, right? I mean, we're doing it right here now. So I'm just saying we're contributing to this. We're talking about there is a lot of information being pushed out today about sales and salespeople. There's a lot of people talking, blogging, podcasting, doing exactly what we're doing here. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of great ideas and everything coming out. But if you're a salesperson and you're out there today, I mean, let's face it, you don't have the time to listen to all of it, to read all of it. So we wanted to talk a little bit about how you can approach your own self-development in a more maybe discerning way, selective way, how you can cut out the noise and really focus on some things that are important and that can really help you in 2018, right? Mm-hmm, immediate impact. So Andy, let's kick off. So what's some advice that you would give to a salesperson out there as he looks at all this great information and all this advice that's flowing, his or her way? Where's the best place to start in being selective and more practical in what you take on board?
Well, I think the first, for me, the first slice of the pie is anything that seems a little hypey, just don't pay attention. Just turn around and walk away. If somebody promises 10x something, 7x something, 1,000% improvement. Yeah, that's BS. I mean, it is. It's just by definition it is. And maybe they have a sample size of 1 that justifies it. I mean, the sample size of 1 is not proof. Mm-hmm. And so there are people, and I like to think I'm one, you're one, and I could name others, Anthony Iannarino, Jeb Blunt, Mike Weinberg, people that are just going to give you good, solid advice without the hype, that's well thought out, that's based on experience, that you can rely on. Mm-hmm. And so I think the hype measure, anything named labeled a hack, I'd be a little suspicious of a hack as well.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so one of the things that always concerns, and you can look back on historical examples of this, right? So we know that buyer behaviors change. We know that selling approaches, are always evolving and all of that. But we've seen a lot of examples in the past, right? With we saw it with the .com era when old business models don't matter anymore until, of course, they do.
Right.
And everything goes, we saw it in the housing market, those old models of putting 20% down. Forget that. Your house is always going to appreciate until it doesn't.
Well, we had an example in sort of the late 2000s, before the 2008, where there was a thought in Silicon Valley among investors that they weren't going to invest in any company that required a sales force.
Right.
Now think about that. and here we are, 8 to 10 years later. Sales has never been more important.
So my point is that it's great to evolve and take on new ideas and new things, and there are always good ones and things that you can add. But my fear is always that we start to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right, and ignore some of the fundamentals that still are valid today. So what do you see that, and do you see there's some real fundamentals that people should, before you start going on to new stuff, that you should really get some of the fundamentals right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to me, sales is still about being able to connect and engage with a human being and build trust in order to inspire them to go on this journey with you, this buying journey, this sales journey, whatever it is. And too often, it seems like most of the advice we see is sort of geared toward later in the sales stages, discovery, all very important. But if you don't master this first part of it first, you're never going to get to those later stages, or the engagements you have are going to be so unsatisfactory. Yeah, I mean, somebody we'll bring you in to do discovery, but we don't really like you. We don't really trust you. They don't have a real incentive to tell you to go away because maybe they need to look at 2 vendors or whatever, right? So I think if people just need to understand that the first thing they need to worry about is that first moment of interaction with the buyer. It's so freighted with significance in terms of creating an impression of you, an impression of your company, And these first impressions are extremely hard to change once they've been created. And yet, it seems like too many salespeople don't say, look, I need to bring my A game to that part of it, because they think the really important part of the sales is at the end.
Right.
And really the important part's at the beginning.
So on that part, and I know you're big on, and we were talking before we went on air about your, how you've always prided yourself on relationship building, right? And that's been the foundation of your success as a salesperson and beyond into today. So how does somebody today, where maybe the engagement is not face to face anymore, maybe it's not even on the telephone, maybe it's on something like this, maybe it's on a go to meeting or a go to webinar,
Sure.
or some other thing. How do you create or make that good first impression and build that relationship when sometimes you don't even meet the person maybe at all, or certainly not till later in the cycle?
I don't think that's changed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was selling before there was the internet and email, not to date myself unnecessarily, but the fact is, I was a field sales guy, but I still spent 90% of my time talking to people on the phone. Mm-hmm. I mean, that part didn't change. So it's doing the little things to prepare to talk to people. I mean, now we have these great tools like LinkedIn and social media. We can sort of, track somebody's digital footprints and see what they're interested in. Because I still am a huge believer in the value of small talk, right? I know there's lots of managers and trainers that think you shouldn't do it. The science is incontrovertible that small talk makes a difference in building a relationship with someone. Well, you're so remiss if you don't spend a little bit of time and try to think about this sort of mass personalization fiction that people hold on to is invest the time to look at somebody, spend a few minutes, look at their LinkedIn profile, see where the common points of connection may be or common interest, and doesn't matter what mechanism you're using or media you're using to speak to them, is start a conversation that, leads a little bit of small talk, a little personal interaction, reveals a little of yourself, a little of them.
Mm-hmm. Because one thing I do notice is that some people get, when they're communicating through technology or whatever, they try to fill all of the gaps in the conversation, right? And that's something, and I understand the challenge. It's like, if you're on a go-to meeting and maybe you don't have videos on, and you're doing something and you say something and there's complete silence at the other end, it's very tempting to go fill in that gap, right? Whereas, as in a good conversation, sometimes you got to give people time to think and actually take in what you said. So when you advise people, how do you advise people on that piece? Because I see that as one that's a critical one, is how to manage the silence, particularly when you can't see someone.
Yeah, well, I think part of what really contributes to the problem is that their minds are so full of these must-dos, right? Mm-hmm. The advice they've been given about what needs to happen in a specific situation. And, they've been drilled on it, they've role-played on it, and so on. And I wrote about this recently. There's this thing called the explicit monitoring theory. And basically what it stipulates is that the research has shown is that you can be a seasoned professional, but if you're trying to have too many sort of thoughts in your mind at one time about what you should be doing, you end up messing up. Mm-hmm. And perfect example is like a golf pro that decides to change their swing, right? They could have had some success, and they say, it's just not right, I'm going to change it. So suddenly, instead of having this automatic motion that reliably drives the ball 300 yards down the fairway, they're thinking about the backswing, taking the club away, they're squaring the face at impact, all these things, and suddenly it's not working. Mm-hmm. Or a basketball player that suddenly can't make free throws, or I hate to have all sports analogies, but a second baseman that can't throw the ball to first base all of a sudden.
Right.
And that's what's going on. Is they're so consumed thinking about what they should be doing, and so really the solution is try to think of fewer things. Right. It's just what's the one thing that you're trying to accomplish in that moment, and it could be. For me, it's what I like to do is I like two things. One is a little vulnerability for me. So I tend to use self-deprecating humor to, show some vulnerability, get people to sort of laugh and engage at me, which is fine. And sometimes I turn the tables on people too. I try to get to that spot quickly where we can sort of do the same for each other, sort of laugh. And because we've all been in sales situations where we're selling to people that are sort of full of their own self-importance, and I'll make a determination pretty quickly whether or not I think there's a chance to break through that. And if I do, I've developed a way to sort of gently tease people about that. That sort of brings them down a bit, right? And sort of gets them off their high horse, and then you can start really opening up and having a real discussion.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think you're right. And if you do that in an environment where you can't see somebody, if there are these gaps, you can say, "Oh, can you give you a minute to think about that?" Or, have you had enough time to think about that? Or do you want to move on to the next thing? But, rather than just go into, got to fill the silence.
Yeah, well, I mean, but that's again from time immemorial with salespeople. As salespeople rush to fill a vacuum, and one of the first things you learn sales 101 is be quiet if the customer's quiet.
Exactly. Let's get some of that thinking time in. So what are some other fundamentals that you see that perhaps maybe aren't getting paid enough attention to, or you would advise salespeople to take another look at as opposed to, running for the next big thing?
Well, I think one of the things that's really important is this idea about building trust. And people think it's sort of this ineffable type thing, right? We really can't define what it is, and yet there have been books written like Speed of Trust by Stephen M. R. Covey and others, that do a very good job of defining, how you build trust. And, some of the things that are very simple to keep in mind is one thing that there's sort of 4 cornerstones, and I created this little acronym called MICE, M-I-C-E, motives, integrity, competence, execution. And borrowed somewhat from Covey on some of those. And so with customers, first thing is they're looking at, are your motives transparent? Can they see what your motives are, your motivations? And, you can say, my motivation is to help you, right? You can go through, my motivation is to help you make the right decision. And then come the 4th week of the month, but we got this 20% discount, if you just buy today. Well, some of you sent the message to them, we don't really care about helping you, we just want to get the order. And we've all done it, right? I'm no saint in that regard. We've all done it, but that's what we're communicating to the customer, and we're damaging the trust that we might have built up to that point. So they may go ahead or they may not. And I've had some horrible stories in my past where I've been pressured to close deals, including calling a customer on Christmas Eve night at his home. Which was not one of my proudest moments.
But did you get the deal?
We did, but the relationship was never the same, quite frankly.
Sure.
I mean, we burnt a bridge to get an order, and the customer didn't go away, but it was never the same. And so because he always was suspicious of our motivations. Integrity is another thing. It's the same thing. That this plays to integrity as well. Integrity is not honesty. That's what people always sort of say. Yeah, sure. Honesty. What it really means in sales is, do your actions reflect your words? And if they're not in alignment, like an example I just gave you, right? If they're not in alignment, then you're eroding trust. And if you do that with somebody who you've never done business with, you can jeopardize the order, and oftentimes do. People wonder, we may have a hockey stick at the end of the month, but that's only because the customer sort of knows your game ahead of time. But a lot of times you'll lose as many customers in that same process because it's like, they don't really care. It's just a sales guy out to get an order.
Yeah. No, I think that's I totally agree with you on the trust thing and the integrity thing. And I think one of the other things that that always kind of cracked me up when I hear people talk about it, and this idea of is I don't want to come off as a salesperson. I'm not a salesperson. I'm not. My title's not even sales. And you pretend that you go. At the end of the day, you go, hey, guess what? When you show up to sell something, the customer or prospect, they know you're a salesperson. So there's no point in pretending that you're not a salesperson. Now, what kind of salesperson are you? Are you a salesperson who can bring some value, who can really kind of dig into their issues, all of that? That's where the magic happens. It's not I've somehow managed to persuade them that I'm not a salesperson. That's, for me, it's nonsense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we all went through sales training. You and I think, similar generations, is where, your first call, you laid out what the close date was of the deal, right? We're going to do this 5 steps, right? We're going to do our discovery, our first call here, the second call is discovery, third call proposal, fourth call decision, right? And sometimes even fifth call decision. And that's going to be, if we do this, it'll be on that date. And it's like, Yeah, I don't. Most customers don't want to work that way these days, right? I mean, and they didn't even want to work that way those days. And you never got the deal on those days unless you're, IBM or something that everybody bought from just because they're IBM. So, yeah, again, the motivation is just you got to be more and more transparent. You got to be there to serve, and it has to be clear to the customer. That's what you're trying to do, because if you have good prospects and you're working them well, and you have that service first mentality, you're going to build up enough deals over time that you will hit your numbers consistently month after month, year after year. The problem is that getting that curve started, and this is where people tend to sacrifice. It's like companies that say, well, yeah, we need to have, I heard one company say they need 7 to 9 times pipeline coverage every month. It's like, are you serious? What you're doing is just telling your people, well, go get crap and throw it in the pipeline. Right? Because all you care is about that. Well, the customer is going to see very clearly you don't care about them, right? You're just there, put them in the pipeline. Yeah. You're not really qualified, but we'll talk to you anyway. And salesperson wastes all this time. And it's just, we're perpetuating those behaviors. And unfortunately, sort of being driven to do it somewhat by the technology we're using, instead of using this technology more intelligently, as we should.
Yeah, and I think the last point is, as you're saying about trust, and that is not to be a chameleon. Because, I mean, chameleons are great, as in the reptiles, are fun to look at as they change color. But in sales and in relationship building and trust, consistency is the most important thing. So, don't show up early in the process as one guy who's great, and later on, maybe as things progress, maybe, and the deal gets closer, then you turn into someone else. And then when the deal closes, you turn into someone else completely. It's like, be consistent, right?
Yeah, and they're accustomed to that, which is not saying they're accustomed to it in a good way. Because I think increasingly is the customer experience in the buying process. It's always been important. I think it's increasingly important because
totally agree.
Products are less differentiated than it might have been, certainly in the tech space, and because it's so easy to copy technology. Is customer experience in the buying process is hugely important. Was it decisive? Yeah, you can make the argument that maybe it is. For products that are pretty identical, priced identically, what is the differentiator? Well, I have experience of going through that process with you. Yeah, I didn't really trust you fully. I trust this guy more. We're going to go with them.
Exactly, because whether we like it or not, and we do this ourselves, we tend to look at it as a predictor of our experience, what our experience is going to be working with this supplier, right? So if the selling experience or buying experience is kind of up and down, and trust hasn't been established, you're going to go, it's probably going to be like that when I'm a customer.
Absolutely. And so this is a key thing, I think, for salespeople to really understand, is that you're being judged every time you interact with the prospects. There's no unimportant sales touch. They're all hugely important. And so Daniel Kahneman, who wrote the book Thinking Fast and Slow, had done some other research about buying decisions and had come up with this formulation called the peak end rule, which was that he studied people going through these experiences. And what they found is that when they had to make sort of a decision about those experiences, is they sort of factored 2 things in mind primarily. One is the peak event during that experience, and one is the last event in that experience. And they tested this in the lab with people in all sorts of different situations. But if you apply that to sales, which say is, okay, well, historically, we sort of conventionally or traditionally think, well, the peak event in the sales process or buying process may be that final presentation before we give them a proposal. We have this sort of cumulative effect that we're building on throughout. But if you look at what Kahneman said, and I think this is absolutely true, is that it could be that you were the first one to respond to an inquiry, or you were the first one to answer a question, and none of the other competitors answered that question. You did it in 30 minutes, everybody else took 2 days, or you lived up to your commitments, early on. Those things could be the peak events. And I'll give you an example. I wrote about it in my first book, because I had a client that was selling a technology product, combination of service and hardware, about 35 grand, something like that per. But they were doing a great job generating a lot of inbound leads. And so when I got there and called him by the CEO, the wheels had sort of fallen off, and he wasn't really sure why. And part was they just weren't following up these leads coming up in a very timely fashion. So we put into place a process sort of immediately. It took about 5 minutes to change it. Is that all leads are going to be followed up within 30 minutes.
Right.
So every lead that came in, and they were followed up with somebody that knew what they're talking about, because the inside sales team, they're relatively technically proficient. And it was like night and day, right? Suddenly they would get a lead, they would call the lead back within 30 minutes, and they would get through oftentimes the demo and everything within the first hour. The competitors were still days away from responding. Well, when they made the decision, what was the peak event? Is the fact they got back to them quickly.
Yeah.
The first contact was the peak event, not the proposal, nothing. The first contact. So the thing is, what I tell people is, you can't predict ahead of time, in the mind's eye of the customer, what is going to be their peak experience during that buying process. Exactly. So you have to assume they're all going to be equally important.
Exactly. So the consistency is absolutely critical. No, I couldn't agree more. Okay, well, we're running out of time here. So, Andy, why don't you tell the viewers a little bit more about yourself, how they can contact you?
Sure. Well, they can contact me. They can follow me on LinkedIn. Connect with me there. Follow me on Twitter @RealAndyPaul. Not tweeting quite as much as I was before at one point, but you might see more of my political opinions these days on Twitter. But yeah, go to andypaul.com or listen to my podcast, Accelerate, currently at 3 days a week. And yeah, you can drop me an email, andy@andypaul.com, or pick up the phone, call me, 619-980-4002.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you got the real Andy Paul on Twitter, because we want to keep all those fake Andy Pauls off the air.
Yeah, I don't want people to think I was imitating you-know-who with the real Andy Paul thing, but it was the best for me. So
okay, perfect. All right, John Golden, SalesPOP Online Sales Magazine, Pipeline of CRM, another expert interview. I'll see you all again soon. Thank you.